final debate. President Donald Trump and Democratic candidate Joe Biden faced off last night in Nashville with different views for the country. We have a report and analysis. Moving forward, the full Senate begins its preparations for next week's scheduled vote on the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. Coronavirus pandemic. New developments in the race to find a treatment for COVID-19. And honoring a saint. We take you inside a new gallery in Rome dedicated to Pope John Paul II. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, October 23rd, 2020. Two major stories we are following tonight. We have a recap of the final presidential debate between President Donald Trump and rival Joe Biden last night in Nashville. Plus, the Senate begins its preparations for a scheduled vote on Supreme Court nominee Judge Amy Coney Barrett on Monday. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. We have analysis on both stories coming up. But first, correspondent Owen Jensen is at the White House with a recap of last night's debate. Owen?
Tracy, from the debate stage last night in Nashville, Tennessee, President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden made their final pitch to voters. Now, this was far less contentious than the first debate, but there was still plenty of arguing.
Don't give me the stuff about how you're this innocent baby. Joe, they're calling you a corrupt politician.
Abraham Lincoln here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history.
President Donald Trump and his Democratic rival Joe Biden both launched broadsides, but they also talked about policy matters like immigration.
We now have as strong a border as we've ever had. We're over 400 miles of brand new wall. You see the numbers, and we let people in, but they have to come in legally.
Within 100 days, I'm going to send to the United States Congress a pathway to citizenship for over 11 million undocumented people.
And regarding the coronavirus,
we have a vaccine that's coming. It's ready. It's going to be announced within weeks, and it's going to be delivered. We have Operation Warp Speed, which is the military is going to distribute the vaccine.
What I would do is make sure we have everyone encouraged to wear a mask all the time. I would make sure we move in the direction of rapid testing, investing in rapid testing. I would make sure that we set up national standards as to how to open up schools and open up businesses.
Another hot topic, the environment, including this exchange.
Would you close down the oil industry?
By the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I will
that's
transition.
A big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a
because
big statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly.
I see.
And here's the deal. But
That's
you
a
can't
big
do
statement.
that. Well, if you let me finish the statement, because it has to be replaced by renewable energy over time.
President Donald Trump also seized on the moment to say Joe Biden would destroy the oil industry. He also blamed the Democratic presidential nominee for past failures.
I ran because of you. I ran because of Barack Obama, because you did a poor job. If I thought you did a good job, I would have never run.
Close to 50 million votes have already been cast in this 2020 presidential election. Now, for Catholics watching last night, some things they did not hear discussed: pro-life issues, religious freedom, limits on church gatherings during the pandemic, and attacks on churches and religious statues from this past summer. Tracy?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you so much, Owen. On Capitol Hill, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says progress is being made in talks to deliver more stimulus money to Americans affected by COVID-19 shutdowns. At the same time, in the Senate, Republicans try to push ahead in the confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, a very unusual day up here at Capitol Hill. Senate Democrats filed motion after motion to try and stop the proceedings of Judge Barrett's confirmation on the Senate floor. They even went so far to ask for a closed session to turn off the cameras and speak candidly with each other, which has only happened a little more than 50 times since 1929. Very unusual. In the end, they did decide to hold the confirmation vote on Monday. But what about COVID relief talks? Well, they continue up here on Capitol Hill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is continuing to push for a huge virus relief bill. It would send another $1,200 in direct payment to most Americans, restart bonus unemployment benefits, fund testing and vaccines, give aid to schools, and allocate money to states and local governments, a Democratic priority.
I am hopeful that we will be able to reach agreement. We've made good progress this week.
A priority for the Senate Republican leader has been liability protections, provisions in the bill to protect everyone from hospitals to businesses and schools from frivolous COVID-19 lawsuits.
There is no chance, there's zero chance America can get back to normal without the Cornyn liability protection. And no bill will be put on the Senate floor that does not include it.
The latest stimulus bill could include extra benefits for workers who lost their jobs due to the pandemic. Last week, 787,000 workers applied for unemployment benefits. That's the lowest level since March, but still high compared to roughly 186,000 claims in the same week in 2019. Speaker Pelosi has refused to lower her demands to get GOP support.
We wouldn't take less of a bill to get it sooner.
And the Speaker says whether a new bill can be signed into law before Election Day is up to Republicans.
I think it is arranged for us to pass it before the election, but it's not up to me to decide what the Senate does. That's a conversation between the president and the majority leader.
Back on Judge Barrett's confirmation, we are expected to have a final vote on Monday, as I mentioned. The vote is expected to be 51-49 to get her confirmed. That is because Republican Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are expected to vote no. They wanted to wait until after the election to fill the seat. Tracy?
Okay, thank you so much, Eric. Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. And joining me now on Skype with analysis of last night's debate and a look at where things stand just 11 days before Election Day is Tim Carney, senior political columnist for the Washington Examiner and resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Tim, welcome back. Always so good to see you. So let's get to last night's debate. It was the last chance for voters to evaluate President Donald Trump and his rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, side by side. How do you think they fared, and how do you think they came across to voters this time?
Well, the debate was much more enlightening on policy than the first debate they had, which was mostly enlightening on the personality of the two debaters, which, frankly, a lot of us know. But we got their answers on interesting questions. We got discussions of immigration. And so I look at it from the perspective of, were voters informed? And on that score, I think they were. And if you look at it from a sort of horse race perspective, Donald Trump, according to the polls, needs to make a comeback. He did well in this last debate, but he didn't strike any knockout blows against Joe Biden. So from that perspective, I did not see that he did enough, as much as he needed to do, to really make this a 50-50 race.
Well, as you know, when President Trump ran back in 2016, he was an outsider, but now both he and Joe Biden have political records to stand on. Let's talk about that and how they defended their records.
Yeah, well, so Trump's best attack was saying, look, you're promising all of these things, Joe, but you were in office for 8 years, you and Barack Obama. For a couple of those years, they had a majority in both chambers and even a supermajority in the Senate. Why didn't you do anything? And Biden had sort of an awkward answer, just blaming the Republicans. So that was a very effective attack, saying this guy's promising a lot, but when he had power last time, he couldn't deliver. But, of course, Biden came back and touched Trump on some very sensitive things. He talked about kids in cages and meaning the separation policy at the border, the zero tolerance policy that results in children and families ending up being separated in border detention areas. That's the sort of issue that for a lot of swing voters really is powerful and can reflect on sort of a heartlessness of this Trump administration. So they both did a good job of pointing out, this is what you did in power, and it wasn't very good.
Well, as Congress continues to hash out a new COVID relief package, the coronavirus pandemic and the economy really remain important issues ahead of the election. How do you think both men did in articulating their plans for the nation? And also, what stood out the most to you?
What stood out the most to me was that I think Trump was right when he said Biden wouldn't have done much different than I did. And this is the kind of question, this unanswerable question in the back of everybody's mind, right? Did it have to be this bad? And we look almost every other country in Europe and a lot of Asian countries, well, they did well for a while, but then it also did bad. So we wonder, could we have done better, especially because we're not going to do drastic lockdowns along the lines of some of these other countries. And Trump wasn't trying to say necessarily that I did an amazing job. He said I did as well as I could, and Joe Biden wouldn't have done much better. And I don't think Biden had quite a comeback to that. So they're both looking at a situation where nobody's happy with the way things have turned out, but they've got to kind of look at the voters and say, Trump has to look at the voters and say, I did the best I could.
Tim, I want to turn now to the other big story on Capitol Hill. The Senate moves forward in the confirmation process for Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. What's your take on how this is all going to play out?
So the Democrats are showing that they know they don't have a chance to stop this unless something extraordinary happens. The 51 Republican votes have been lined up. Even if you had a defection, the Republicans would still have the tie-breaking vote with the vice president. And so there's not much of a worry from the Republican side. From the Democrats, they're trying to slow things down, which is what the minority always does. And they're maybe trying to score some political points by making a fuss about either the process or about the nominee. But on the nominee, they've kind of given up on attacking Barrett. She started off with something like 37% of the public saying she should be confirmed. Most recent poll I saw had 51% to 28% saying yes, she should be confirmed, versus only 28% opposing, which is basically the hardcore Democratic base. So the Democrats are not able to use her as a negative to try to harm the Republicans in the way they hoped. So now they're trying to use the process in order to sour some voters or motivate their own base ahead of Election Day.
Okay, Tim, we'll leave it right there. Thank you so much. Tim Carney, senior political columnist for the Washington Examiner and resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks again.
Thank you.
President Donald Trump also made an announcement on peace in the Middle East. In a deal brokered by the United States, he says Sudan will normalize ties with Israel. The North African nation joins the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain in doing so. U.S. regulators have approved the first drug to treat COVID-19. Remdesivir is an antiviral medicine given to hospitalized patients. Today, the Secretary of Health and Human Services also spoke about the increase of COVID cases in the U.S. Correspondent Mark Irons joins us now with more. Mark?
Tracy, Secretary Alex Azar says we're in a very serious moment right now. Today he spoke about the increasing COVID numbers in parts of the Midwest and the Plains, and he also talked about preventative measures.
Community spread is happening because we've got to keep focused on washing our hands, watching our distance, and wearing our face coverings when we can't watch our distance, and in particular being careful in household gatherings. This has become a major vector of disease spread.
Secretary Azar also spoke about some improvements in fighting the virus. He said back in April, if you were 70 and above, you had more than a 30% chance of dying from COVID-19. Now, thanks to treatments, including the new FDA-approved antiviral drug Remdesivir, the odds are much better.
Thanks to Remdesivir, steroids, convalescent plasma, better treatment protocols, that has been reduced to well under 10%, and we literally are weeks to months away from next-generation monoclonal antibody therapies that'll treat and prevent disease.
Remdesivir is either approved or has temporary authorization in about 50 countries. President Donald Trump received it when he was sick earlier this month with the coronavirus. And the FDA has also given emergency authorization to using the blood of survivors. And 2 drug companies are seeking a similar authorization to use experimental antibody drugs. And Tracy, according to Johns Hopkins University, we've seen more than 8.4 million cases of COVID and more than 223,000 deaths. Tracy.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Several European countries are seeing a sharp rise in COVID-19, and Slovakia is planning to test the entire population. More than 5 million people live in Slovakia, and the health department has 13 million rapid antigen tests. Testing is voluntary and free of charge. The Slovakian military is helping to test everyone between the ages of 10 and 65. In Portugal, the parliament is on the verge of making masks mandatory in public. Most people in Lisbon already wear masks outside. Yesterday, Portuguese Parliament announced a ban on people traveling next weekend in an effort to discourage family gatherings on Halloween and on All Saints' Day. A historic breakthrough in the fighting in Libya today, with all sides signing a permanent ceasefire agreement.
The parties agreed that all military units and armed groups on the front lines shall return to their camps. This shall be accompanied by the departure of all mercenaries and foreign fighters from all Libyan territories.
The United Nations mediated talks and calls the signing of the ceasefire an important turning point in bringing peace to Libya. The rival side signed the deal in Geneva today after years of fighting. Libya was plunged into chaos in 2011 after the NATO bombing campaign toppled dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Australian police officials say they are not investigating any money transfers to the country from the Vatican. Italian media speculated that the money was tied to the case involving Cardinal George Pell. He was convicted of child sexual abuse in his native Australia. The charges were later overturned. Officials in Australia confirm money was transferred there from the Holy See, but add there was nothing suspicious about the funds. Pope Francis says a plenary indulgence is available to the faithful for the entire month of November. Catholics can receive the indulgence in November by visiting a cemetery and praying for the deceased. Usually, there is only available for the first week. However, it was extended because of the coronavirus pandemic. Coming up, a Christian school in Oregon is suing the state's governor for restricting its in-person learning. The head of the Diocese of Santa Fe in New Mexico has asked churches to stop holding Sunday Mass indefinitely. Archbishop John Wester says the measure comes as the state battles a surge in COVID-19 cases. He's also calling for funerals and weddings to be delayed. Catholic schools, however, are allowed to remain open. And in Colorado, a federal judge says the state cannot enforce COVID-19 restrictions against two churches. The ruling states the houses of worship were being treated more strictly than other gatherings, and those restrictions violated the guarantee of a free exercise of religion. A private Christian school in Oregon is suing the state's governor for not allowing it to offer in-person learning despite allowing public schools of the same size to resume in-person classes amid coronavirus restrictions. Hermiston Christian School is being allowed to open as a daycare facility, but could face penalties, including jail time and fines, if students in its facility for daycare receive in-person instruction. Ryan Tucker, senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom and director of the Center for Christian Ministries, joins me now on Skype. ADF is representing the school in this case. Ryan, welcome back. So nice to see you. So let's talk a little bit more about this case. There certainly appears to be different standards or guidelines for private and public schools. Why do you think that is?
Well, there absolutely are. Oregon is really targeting religious schools in the state. If you're a small public school, meaning you're less than 75 students, you are eligible to open for in-person learning. On the other hand, if you're a small religious school, again, 75 kids or less, you are not allowed to even apply to reopen for in-person instruction. So the state is allowing public schools one thing and denying the same benefit to religious schools, and that's unconstitutional, and it's just lacking in common sense.
Right. As far as the governor is concerned, Catherine Brown, has she said anything about this?
She really hasn't. She did say 2 days ago that she would take another look at her guidelines. And as you mentioned before, this school is open during the day as a daycare facility. The state Board of Education has approved it as a daycare facility. So the exact same students that would attend the school for hours, they can be watched. They can be, made sure that they don't harm themselves or, they don't get hurt on the playground. But the moment that these principals or the teachers decide to teach them anything, then they can go to prison. It's a 30-day imprisonment penalty and a $1,250 fine potentially.
It's so odd to me. So the school is allowed to function as a daycare facility. And of course, to me, I would think that would indicate that it's following the recommendations by the health and safety guidelines. So wouldn't the school be able to function as a school in that case?
Well, one would think, and in fact, the state has sent them documentation showing that they applaud their health and safety protocols. So the state is saying, on the one hand, sure, you can have these kids there for hours on end. So you can, watch over little Johnny. You can make sure he's not, doing anything he shouldn't during the course of the day. Again, but the moment you start teaching him anything, well, then the person doing so could go to prison for it. And it's just it's complete nonsense. It's unconstitutional, and that's why we had to step in to represent the school.
Brian, can you talk about how this is impacting the teachers and the families there?
Well, it's very difficult. I'm the father of 4. We all know how Zoom school works, and there are some students that are still doing that during this time frame. And even the governor herself has come out and said that remote learning just isn't working. And so it's had a drastic effect. Obviously, these teachers are put in this weird position of being able to watch over students, but making sure that they don't teach them anything. And so where that line is drawn is obviously confusing, and it just makes no sense that you can, do one thing for 7 hours during the day that on the flip side, you can't teach them anything. The virus doesn't know the difference between a kid being watched over and one that's being taught. And our hope is that the governor, the state itself, rights this wrong, but otherwise, if they don't, we will continue to pursue our case.
Yeah, and what would you like to see happen next? And what's going to happen to the school?
Well, the school is about 8 miles south of the Washington border, so it's really in a difficult spot because there are students in that community who have the option to go north to the state of Washington, where their schools are open. And are open for in-person instruction. And so, this poor school is facing this dynamic of parents coming to them and saying, why should I pay money for daycare when I can have my kids instructed just, a few miles north of here? And so it's put them in a very difficult spot. And again, our hope is that the governor will right this wrong, that the state officials will come in, correct these guidelines that are just not even sensical. But if she doesn't, if the state itself doesn't remedy this, again, we'll look to put this before the court next week.
Ryan, thanks so much for your time. Please keep us posted. Ryan Tucker, Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom and the Director of the Center for Christian Ministries. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Up next, a report says federal funding to Planned Parenthood has increased. And we take you inside a new gallery dedicated to St. John Paul II. Planned Parenthood is getting more government funding despite efforts by the Trump administration to cut federal funding of abortions. Planned Parenthood is legally banned from using federal funds for elective abortions, but pro-life groups say federal dollars still allow it to free up other resources for abortions. The abortion providers' revenue has gone up in recent years. The U.S. and 32 other countries signed a document promoting women's health and protecting life.
In front of world leaders at the 2019 United Nations General Assembly, President Trump said, quote, "We in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God."
Secretary Mike Pompeo participated in today's virtual signing along with Health Secretary Alex Azar. The Geneva Consensus Declaration calls for the preservation of human life, better health for women, and strengthening the family as the foundational unit of society. The president of Poland says that he welcomes yesterday's landmark court decision that says abortion on the basis of fetal abnormalities is against the country's constitution. President Andrzej Duda told a local newspaper, quote, "Every child has a right to life." The provision cannot be appealed, and it could lead to a significant reduction in the number of abortions in the Catholic country. The ruling was announced on the feast of St. John Paul II, a native of Poland. And finally tonight, Poland isn't the only location celebrating St. John Paul II. In Rome, an art exhibit recently opened filled with exclusive photographs and other items associated with the man who led the Catholic Church for 27 years. The gallery is just steps away from St. Peter's Square and features artifacts from St. John Paul II's papacy. It also includes exclusive photographs of St. John Paul II shot by Giancarlo Giuliani, who photographed the legendary Pope for 27 years. Giuliani said what struck him the most about the saint was his expressions, openness to having his picture taken, and how he was a friend to the people. The Polish ambassador to the Holy See has similar memories. He finds that reading the letters of John Paul II gives him clarity.
It's very important in nowadays that St. John Paul II was a pope who was saying yes, yes, no, no, very openly.
The ambassador has been in Rome for over 4 years and told our EWTN Rome Bureau when he visits the tomb of John Paul II, he always finds pilgrims praying there. The exhibit at the Arte Poli Gallery will be open to the public until April 2nd, 2021, the 16th anniversary of the saint's death. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.